The issue is, as McLean has clearly shown, the vast bulk of our ego awareness, our personality, our awareness of selves in the world, translates into our awareness through the two animal brains, and only the tiniest fragment of it through the intellectual brain.
But I'm gathering from what you said earlier about the brain tissue dissolving that it must be very crucial in the certain stages in the child's development that they get a lot of stimulation.
Surely, and it depends on what kind of stimulation. See, Hilgard at Stanford, as you know, said that around about age 7 the child becomes acutely susceptible to suggestion of the ideas implicit in his society. That is, the ideas his society gives him of his place in the universe, what the whole show is about, his capacities, his limitations, and so on, and imprints to those through his intellectual brain. Now, values, yes, but the values as they apply to his relationships, which means the way the new brain is then going to influence the emotional brain that he shares with all mammals.
That's interesting. It suggests that we basically become acculturated through a form of hypnosis.
If you want to call it that. But the issue is that we imprint according to, our brain imprints and makes all its neural patterns according to the suggestions given. They don't even have to be spelled out to the child. They can be psychologically implied within the child's ambient, in his whole ambient. Now, that brings up another point, Jeffrey, and that is a whole raft of recent studies have shown that fully 95% of all learning and memory that the brain lays down in that neural patterning takes place beneath conscious awareness. Only 5% of those neural patterns will result from all of our training of our children, all of our disciplines of our children, all of our teaching of them and so on, can only account for about 5%.
And as we're unconscious of most of what we impart to our children.
Totally. 95% of what the child is picking up from us, we're not aware of and the child is not aware of. And there are a lot of good, solid reasons for that, and they're all physiological. I mean, none of it's occultic or just hypothesis. We know how this thing works. So it means that if you look at what most of us think about our child, we want a better world for our child than we've had. We don't want our child to have the bad behaviors that we have had. We want them to avoid the pitfalls we've fallen into, and we want them to have the few joys we've had, a lot more, and not know all the miseries we've had.
Of course.
So immediately, the minute they can use language, Jeffrey, we start prescribing to them the behaviors that we intellectually think might help them to avoid all the pitfalls. Now, we're trying to prescribe verbally, through our teaching, prescriptions for their behavior that will help them to keep from being who we actually are.
But our nonverbal signals are just the opposite. They are who we actually are.
But the child is simply imprinting with 95% of the whole psychic machinery of the brain to our states of being, to who we are physically, who we actually are emotionally, and to who we actually are intellectually. And every intellectual idea I have of myself, I'm no good, you know, I'm isolated, I'm estranged, I don't work in the world, and I'm this, that, and the other, the child is automatically imprinting through this non-conscious or non-aware process. Certainly it's a conscious process, but that we're not aware of it, the child isn't aware of it.
Particularly, I gather, self-esteem.
Oh, any of these things. The slightest suggestion, you see, becomes simply the command of the child in this respect. And particularly in all of this, our emotional states. Because we know that the child is imprinting to our emotional states continually through that emotional cognitive brain structure. Now, of course, they do a lot of imprinting to our physical posture, stances, and gestures, but those are almost incidental compared to the overwhelming power of the intellectual emotional.
It sounds like what you're saying is, it reflects the old biblical saying, the sins of the fathers shall be visited
on the third and fourth. The father eats sour grapes and it sets the son's teeth on edge to the third and fourth generation too. Indeed it does. Now the other tragedy of this though, that would all be simple. But you see the 5% of our prescriptions for the child's behavior, which he has to try to follow, because the child is driven by one of his greatest instinctual intents to follow the model of the parent or the teacher or whoever it is in society at all cost. And really, we don't believe this, but he's trying desperately to follow our models with that 5%. But since we're telling him to be something we are not, since we want a better world for the child, the other 95% is simply imprinting automatically to who we are. And of course, since who we are radically outweighs who we tell the child to be, the child is simply split right down the middle.
Creates a conflict.
Terrible conflict, and he cannot conceivably be who we tell him to be, because 95% of him is simply going to be who we are. And then when he fails to be who we tell him to be, as simply this whole system imprints to who we are in our states of awareness, we then accuse him of moral failure to measure up to our lofty standards of our prescriptions.
Lowers the self-esteem even further.
And it splits him even more.
Yeah.
So my teacher, Guru Mai, says, until that which you think, that which you act, and that which you speak, and so on, and feel, are all a single integrated unit, not only are you robbed of your own power and efficiency in the world, but you fragment every child that you even pass on the street, since the child is simply influenced by the whole emotional, cognitive, intellectual ambient of everyone as he passes.